Right? Right now, someone in your life is slowly destroying you, and you have no idea it's happening. They might be sitting across from you at dinner, sharing your bed, working in the next cubicle. Hell, they might even be looking back at you in the mirror. Carl Jung spent decades uncovering a terrifying truth. The people who damage us most aren't the obvious villains. They're not the screaming psychopaths or the obvious abusers. No, the real danger comes from something far more insidious. It comes from people who don't even know they're destroying you. And here's the part that'll make your skin crawl. You're probably helping them do it. See, Jung discovered that most human behavior happens below the surface, in the unconscious mind. And when someone's unconscious is infected with unhealed wounds, repressed desires, and hidden shadows, that poison doesn't stay contained. It spreads, like a virus, and you become the host. Think about it. How many times have you walked away from someone feeling completely drained? How many times have you been blamed for things you never did? How many times have you found yourself playing therapist to someone else's drama? That's not coincidence. That's psychological invasion. Jung called it projection. It's when someone takes everything they hate about themselves and throws it onto you. From that moment, you stop being a real person. You become their mirror. Their enemy, their savior, their dumping ground. But here's what's really messed up. These aren't evil people we're talking about. They're not plotting your destruction in some dark basement. They're unconscious. They're sleepwalking through life, spreading their psychological wounds like a contagion. And that makes them infinitely more dangerous. If you've been wondering why certain relationships feel like walking through quicksand, this video will give you answers. We're about to expose the 6 types of people that Jung identified as emotionally hazardous. Not because they're monsters, but because they're unconscious monsters. And fair warning. By the end of this, you might realize you've been one of these people yourself. But first, if this kind of psychological insight interests you, hit that subscribe button. Because we're going deep into territory most people are too afraid to explore. Let's start with the first type, the one that'll make you question every relationship you've ever had, the unconscious manipulator. When your reality becomes their playground. You know that person who makes you feel crazy, the one who somehow turns every conversation into you apologizing for things you didn't do. Meet the unconscious manipulator. They don't wake up planning to mess with your head. They don't have some master plan to drive you insane, but they're carrying around a psychological wound so deep, so unhealed, that they unconsciously turn everyone around them into characters in their private horror movie. Jung said something that'll chill you to the bone. What we refuse to face in ourselves, we meet as our fate. And for the unconscious manipulator, you are their fate. You're the walking embodiment of everything they can't deal with inside themselves. Here's how it works. They've got emotional fragments floating around in their unconscious, traumas they never processed, anger they never acknowledged, shame they never faced. And instead of doing the hard work of dealing with this stuff, they project it outward. Onto you. Suddenly, you're responsible for their feelings. You're the cause of their pain. You're the reason they can't be happy. And the scariest part, they genuinely believe it. These people live in a state of chronic projection. Everything that goes wrong in their life has an external cause. They're never the problem. They're always the victim. And you're always the perpetrator. When they feel angry, it's because you provoked them. When they're sad, it's because you disappointed them. When they feel small, it's because you think you're better than them. The manipulation is so subtle, you start questioning your own sanity. Did I really say something wrong? Am I being insensitive? Maybe I am the problem. And that's exactly where they want you. Jung called this psychic blindness. The unconscious manipulator literally cannot see you as you are. They see you as a symbol of their internal conflict. And they react to that symbol as if it's reality. But here's the kicker. These people are often incredibly charming. They have this magnetic quality, this emotional intensity that makes you think you can save them. You think you understand them better than anyone else. Wrong. What you're actually doing is sacrificing your psychological health trying to rescue someone who refuses to rescue themselves. You're pouring your energy into a black hole that will never be filled. Jung warned that these projection patterns trap us in symbolic roles. We stop being real people and become characters in their unconscious drama. The hero, the villain, the parent, the child, anything except who we actually are. And living in a symbolic relationship is living in a prison. The only way out is brutal self-awareness. You have to recognize the patterns, cut the invisible threads, and ask yourself constantly, is what I'm feeling right now actually mine? Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't break down your door. They slip through the cracks of your empathy. And once you're hooked, they'll drag you into their psychological underworld. But that's just the beginning. The next type is even more dangerous because they don't just manipulate your emotions. They manipulate your entire sense of reality. The persona prisoner, living in the house of mirrors. We all wear masks. At work, we're professional. With family, we're loving. With friends, we're fun. These masks aren't necessarily bad. Jung called them personas, and they help us navigate different social situations. But what happens when someone becomes their mask? What happens when the persona becomes a prison? Jung said the persona is not what someone is, but what they and others think they are. It's a constructed identity based on what gets approval, what avoids conflict, what looks good on social media. The persona prisoner has forgotten who they are underneath the mask. They've become so identified with their image that their authentic self has been buried alive, and that makes them incredibly dangerous to be around. These people are masters of functional superficiality. They say what you want to hear. They behave the right way. They avoid any behavior that might crack their perfect image. But underneath, there's a soul screaming. Here's what makes them so toxic. They don't just live behind a mask. They demand that you wear one too. They expect you to perform, to fit into their carefully constructed reality show. If you express something real, something messy, something human, they shut down. They get uncomfortable. They make you feel like you're doing something wrong by simply being authentic. Living with a persona prisoner is like living in a house of mirrors. Nothing is real. Everything is performance. And after a while, you start to forget who you are too. You begin policing your own emotions, measuring your words, hiding parts of yourself that don't fit the perfect narrative. You start wearing a mask to match theirs, and that's how the infection spreads. Jung warned that identification with the persona is one of the greatest threats to what he called individuation. That's the process of becoming who you really are, of integrating all parts of yourself, including the messy ones. But the persona prisoner has abandoned that journey. They've chosen the comfort of pretense over the difficulty of authenticity, and they'll drag you down with them. The really messed up part is that they often look like they have it all together. They're successful, well-liked, admired, but it's all hollow. They're living someone else's life and they don't even know it. And because they've repressed so much of themselves, because they've pushed down every uncomfortable feeling, every inappropriate thought, every inconvenient desire, all that repressed material doesn't disappear. It transforms into something much darker. It becomes shadow. And when someone has been repressing their shadow for years, when it finally breaks free, the destruction is catastrophic. The shadow denier, when the nice guy explodes. There's nothing more dangerous than a nice person who's been too nice for too long. You know the type, always pleasant, always agreeable, always in control. They never lose their temper, never say anything inappropriate, never step out of line, until they do. And when they finally snap, it's apocalyptic. This is the shadow denier, someone who's spent so much energy repressing their dark side that they've created a psychological time bomb. Jung spent years studying what he called the shadow. It's everything we consider unacceptable about ourselves. Our anger, our envy, our lust, our selfishness. All the parts of us that don't fit our ideal self-image. But here's the thing Jung discovered. The shadow doesn't go away when you ignore it. It doesn't disappear when you meditate it away or pray it away or positive think it away. It goes underground, and it grows. The shadow denier lives in constant emotional vigilance. They don't allow themselves to feel anger, so they condemn others who do. They don't allow themselves to be selfish, so they attack others who are. They don't allow themselves to be sexual, so they judge others who express sexuality. They become the morality police of their own social circle, always critical, always finding fault, always holding others to impossible standards. But all of this is just an attempt to keep their own shadow locked away. Jung said it perfectly: the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The more someone tries to be perfect, the more violent their shadow becomes. You can spot these people by their disproportionate reactions. They explode over small things. They hold grudges for years. They sabotage relationships in passive-aggressive ways that would make a spy jealous. They're the ones who seem so calm and collected until someone pushes the wrong button. Then they become unrecognizable, vicious, cruel, like a completely different person has taken over their body. And that's exactly what's happened. The shadow has seized control. Living with a shadow denier is like living next to an unexploded bomb. You never know what innocent comment or action is going to trigger the explosion. So you start walking on eggshells, measuring every word, avoiding topics that might set them off. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. The shadow isn't just made of negative stuff. It also contains our repressed creativity, our hidden strength, our authentic power. When someone denies their shadow, they're not just repressing their dark side. They're repressing their full humanity, and all that repressed energy has to go somewhere. It usually goes into judgment, into criticism, into moral superiority, which brings us to our next type. The one who doesn't just repress their own shadow, they make you feel guilty for having one. The moral dictator, guilt as a weapon. Some people don't need handcuffs to imprison you. They use guilt. Meet the moral dictator. The self-appointed guardian of virtue who's made it their life mission to point out everyone else's flaws while remaining blind to their own. These aren't your obvious religious fanatics or political extremists. They're much more subtle. They're the people who always know what's right, who always have an opinion about how you should live your life, who make you feel like a moral failure just by being yourself. Jung understood that when morality becomes a weapon, it stops being about ethics and starts being about control. The moral dictator operates from a position of projected shadow. They take everything they can't accept about themselves and condemn it in others. They become the prosecutor, judge, and jury of human behavior, but they genuinely believe they're helping. They think they're correcting, saving, educating. And that makes them incredibly dangerous because their criticism comes wrapped in good intentions. I'm only telling you this for your own good. Someone needs to tell you the truth. You'll thank me later. But this isn't truth. It's projection with a moral mask. The moral dictator has an unconscious need to maintain an image of purity, so they project evil onto everyone else. They need sinners to exist so they can play saint. If you live with someone like this, you'll start feeling constantly guilty, like you're always doing something wrong even when you're just living your life. You feel watched, judged, diminished. And the most insidious part, you start internalizing their judgment. You begin policing your own thoughts and feelings. You start repressing parts of yourself that are completely natural and human. Their morality becomes your prison. Jung saw this pattern as a serious threat to psychological development. Where there's excessive moralism, there's usually an absence of self-knowledge. The extreme moralist doesn't want truth. They want control. And when they can't control the external world, They start controlling the internal world of the people around them. But moral dictators aren't the only ones driven by unconscious forces. There's another type that's even more unpredictable, even more volatile, the complex individual, the emotional landman walking on eggshells. Imagine living with someone who's sweet and loving one moment, then exploding in rage the next, where a simple comment can trigger a 3-day silent treatment, where you never know which version of them you're going to get. Welcome to life with someone dominated by unconscious complexes. Jung discovered that we all carry these autonomous fragments of emotion and memory in our unconscious. They're like separate personalities within us, created by traumas and unresolved experiences. For most of us, these complexes influence us subtly. But for some people, complexes take complete control. They become emotional puppets, dancing to the tune of their unhealed wounds. A simple comment connects unconsciously to an old abandonment. A joke triggers memories of childhood rejection. A gesture of affection gets interpreted as a threat, and everyone around them pays the price. The complexed person doesn't realize they're being controlled by these internal forces. When they explode in fury or shut down in silence, they think they're responding to the present situation. But they're not. They're reliving the past. And this doesn't happen consistently. It comes in unpredictable waves. There are emotional explosions followed by moments of clarity and regret, periods of genuine connection interrupted by inexplicable ruptures. This inconsistency is what makes the relationship so addictive. You think, they're not always like this. Sometimes they're wonderful, and that hope keeps you hooked. But those wonderful moments are followed by unpredictable storms where you find yourself in the middle of an emotional hurricane you don't understand. You start adapting, avoiding certain topics, walking on eggshells, trying not to wake the sleeping monster. But here's the brutal truth. That monster isn't awakened by you. It's always there, waiting for any trigger to emerge. And when it does, it consumes everything around it. Jung said unrecognized complexes end up colonizing the psyche. They speak for you, feel for you, act for you. And in the case of the complex person, this happens constantly. Living with someone like this means never having emotional stability. The present is always contaminated by ghosts from the past. And eventually, you start absorbing those ghosts too. You begin doubting yourself, your memory, your feelings. Without realizing it, you're being colonized by their unconscious. But as dangerous as the complex person is, there's one more type that might be the most insidious of all. Because they don't shout or explode or accuse, they just slowly drain the life out of you. The energy vampire, death by 1,000 needs. Some people don't want your love, they want your life force. They don't take it violently. They sip it slowly, drop by drop, until you're walking around like an empty shell wondering where all your energy went. Meet the psychic vampire. Jung didn't use that exact term, but he understood the dynamic perfectly. He called it pathological symbiosis, a bond where two people stop being individuals and become psychological extensions of each other. The energy vampire lives in this kind of relationship. They need your constant attention, your daily comfort, your 24/7 availability. But behind all that neediness is a void that isn't yours and that you'll never be able to fill. It starts innocently. You offer support. You give time. You tolerate increasingly demanding behavior in the name of being understanding, until you realize all your energy is being drained and you don't know where you end and they begin. The exhaustion is profound. It's not just physical, it's existential. It feels like your soul is being devoured, piece by piece, day after day. Jung wrote about people who, unable to sustain themselves psychically, attach to others like emotional parasites. And that's exactly what the energy vampire does. They don't want to grow, they want to be carried. But the danger isn't just the exhaustion, it's the dissolution of self. You start feeling guilty for wanting space, selfish for wanting silence, cold for wanting distance, because the energy vampire is a master at reversing roles. From victim, they become accuser. From needy, they become manipulator. And before you know it, you're living to avoid crisis, to maintain peace, to sustain a bond that's killing you inside. The energy vampire doesn't respect boundaries because they don't see you as separate from them. You exist to meet their needs, soothe their pain, fill their emptiness. And the most twisted part, they often frame this as love. I need you so much. You're the only one who understands me. I don't know what I'd do without you. But this isn't love, it's consumption. Jung understood that one of the greatest threats to psychological development is symbiotic relationships, where people lose their individual identity. Where two people become one, and that one is usually the more demanding person. The energy vampire will drain your time, your attention, your empathy, and your sanity. They'll make you feel guilty for having a life outside of their needs. They'll turn your natural compassion into a trap, and they'll do it all while playing the victim, the mirror that doesn't lie. Here's what Jung understood that most people refuse to face. We're all capable of being any of these types. We all have shadow, we all have wounds, we all have the capacity for unconscious projection, emotional manipulation, and energy vampirism. The difference is consciousness. The difference is having the courage to look in the mirror and see not just the person you want to be, but the person you actually are, including the parts you'd rather ignore. Jung's entire body of work points to one central truth. What we don't make conscious controls us from the shadows. The unconscious manipulator, the persona prisoner, the shadow denier, the moral dictator, the complex individual, and the energy vampire are all people who have lost the battle with their own unconscious. And now their unconscious is running the show. But here's the empowering part. Once you can see these patterns, once you can name them, you can break free from them, whether they exist in others or in yourself. This isn't about becoming judgmental or paranoid. It's about becoming conscious. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your own psyche. Because the more light we shine on the unconscious, the less power it has to control us. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these types of people. You will. The question is whether you'll recognize them, whether you'll have the awareness to protect yourself, whether you'll have the courage to look at your own reflection and see which of these patterns might be living inside you. Jung believed that the goal of human development is individuation, becoming who you really are, not who others want you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you actually are, shadows and all. And that journey starts with consciousness, with seeing clearly, with refusing to live in the fog of unconscious projection and manipulation. The people we've talked about today aren't evil, they're unconscious. And unconsciousness, Jung taught us, is the most dangerous force in human psychology. But consciousness is the antidote. So here's my challenge to you. Look around your life. Look at your relationships. Look in the mirror. Which of these patterns do you recognize? Which ones have you encountered? Which ones might you be carrying yourself? Drop a comment below and let me know. Your awareness could be the beginning of your freedom. And your honesty might help someone else recognize their own prison. Because the journey towards psychological freedom starts with one simple act, telling the truth about what you see. The shadows lose their power when you turn on the lights. And right now for you, the lights are on.